Welcome to myviolinrecital.com. This is Diane Allen, the website's creator. Today we have part 2 of our fingerboard geography series. In part 1 we discussed the piano keyboard and the order of the notes and half steps and whole steps. If you have any questions about any of that, I would suggest that you go back and view the part 1 video. I'm going to continue where I left off on part 2 here. So we have on the bottom we have the violin. We have the G string, the D string, the A string, and we have the E string. In each of these squares we have the open string labeled G string, D string, A string, and E string. And the scroll is up here, and your chin or head would be way down here. So as you go this way on the violin, the sound of each note gets higher. And this way, if you take fingers off, the sound would get lower. So on the violin, this way is up, and this way is down. Each of these circles is where we would put our fingers. And each circle is a half step. If we took the piano and stretched out those white keys so those black keys could slip down in between and put all the notes in a row, that is all half steps in a row. That is how we have the notes arranged on the violin. They're all half steps in a row. There's something else that you'll see here, which are these orange stripes. And typically people who our beginners have tapes on their violins, and this would be a typical place where tapes are placed. What I'm going to do at this time is just call out on the A string where I have these tapes, so you can just kind of check and see if your tapes are in the same place. So we have our open A, we have our first finger B is on the tape, second finger C sharp is on this tape, third finger D is on this tape, and pinky E is on this tape. Each circle, as I mentioned, is a half step. So for example, here to here is a half step, here to here is a half step, making here to here a whole step. Here to here is a half step, here to here is a half step, making here to here a whole step. When we play the violin and you have fingers in a row, or like a scale going up or like a scale going down, we place our fingers either close together so that they're touching or far apart. When they're close together, touching, that would be the half step. Like you see here, these two notes are right next to each other. If you have a space in between, that would be a whole step. But this would still be two fingers right next to each other on your hand. So let's take a look at these finger numbers outside here. Each of these circles, remember, is where we put our fingers, and so the first finger is going to take these two places. The second finger is going to take these two places, and what we have is a lower place and a higher place for each finger. The second finger in its low spot, the second finger in its high spot, the third finger in its low spot, the third finger in its high spot. Here we have our pinky in its low spot, and what we have here is called an extension, and that's where the pinky is reaching a half step outside of what we call first position. I have some letters in here, and these are the natural notes. No sharps, no flats. I just plotted on the violin fingerboard where the natural notes are. So we have A, B, C. You can see B to C, big cookies, is right next to each other. There's no note in between them. Even though they're natural notes, they're right next to each other like a half step. So we had learned a rule earlier that when all the notes are natural, they're all whole steps apart because there's a note in between. Except B to C and E to F, big cookies, and eat fudge. There's no black key in between, so they are going to be half steps. And you see that here, E, F, B, C. They're right next to each other. Open E to first finger F natural, way back on the end of the violin fingerboard here, is a half step. All of these empty circles would be the sharps and the flats. So let's take a look at the A string, for example. Here we have A, and we have B, and we have an empty place in between. So up here on the piano we have A to B, and the note in between is A sharp or B flat. So on the violin fingerboard we would have A sharp or B flat. This is the same exact note, but in your music it may be written differently. It might be written as an A sharp or a B flat. In either case, this is the spot on the violin where you would play that note. So we have B to C, natural. These are half steps. We have our next spot that's open is in between C and D. In between C and D, we have a key up here. It's C sharp or D flat. So we have C sharp or D flat. So you can go through each of these empty spots and label them, and you can also see which finger will end up playing in each spot. So let's take a look at our C and our C sharp again. Here's C natural, played with second finger in its low position, and then here's C sharp, played with second finger in its high position. This is a visual reference of where the notes are on the violin in first position. And the tapes on your violin, if you have them, are your first visual reference. And what we see here is the big picture. We see how these notes, where your tapes are, fit into the grand scheme of the order of notes. Violin players, once again, really have to know their half steps and their whole steps. And that's why I love using the piano as a reference, because you could see with the black keys and the white keys where you have a couple quirky spots here. What we're going to do in our next part of this series is talk about how to practically use this material in your day-to-day practicing. But what we have here today is just, these are the notes, this is the order of our notes, this is how they fit on the violin, these are where we put our fingers, these are the strings, these are half steps and whole steps. And that is a summary of what we have done so far. Thank you for visiting, and I hope you have learned from this material and continue to learn and have a great time practicing and increasing your knowledge of the violin fingerboard. All of this material is available to download, and you'll find that on my blog. And once again, thanks for visiting and happy practicing.